Hello and welcome to Network Collective. Today we're going to dive into being a value-added reseller and working with one. So cut your POs, finish up your build of materials, and get ready for the VAR Show. Joining us for Network Collective to talk about VARs, we have with us today Zach Miller. Zach, would you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm glad to be here. I'm Zach Miller. Right now, I'm a managing architect at Core BTS. Prior to that, I started at the age of 12 in IT. So as you can tell from looking at me, that was 2 years ago. So I have a lot of experience. But no, honestly, I've been working in enterprise IT for the last 9 years. So I'm glad to be joining and look forward to this show.
All right. And Warren Jackson, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm Warren Jackson. I'm a network engineer for Worldwide Technology. I have been in internetworking now for 15 years. I've been in IT for 20. And I've been doing computers probably about the same age as him, except I look a little older now, as you can see. So, but I'm really excited about the opportunity to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. So let's start off with a really simple question. What are some reasons customers use a VAR?
Yeah, I think from my aspect and my experience when I was working in enterprise IT, the reason we use VARs, there was really two breakdowns that I looked at it from. Is one, I was looking for what I used to call a quote filler. And the idea is I need somebody to turn around quotes quickly for me because I looked at the part numbers myself. And I think it's difficult because that really wasn't a VAR when I looked at it. It was using a VAR kind of company, but it wasn't value added. I needed somebody also to help me do designs, help me do the research, help me almost be my R&D arm. So when I was doing that, I looked at those VARs, and I was using medium-sized VARs at that point in time to do that because I was in a medium-sized organization. And when I tried to use large VARs, they just didn't give me the attention I thought I should or would deserve with the business I was looking at. So it was tough because there was a lot of different options to choose from. And there's I was the small fish in a big pond is how I felt. So with that, I didn't get the attention I deserved, I felt, and I kept switching VARs, but then that broke my relationship with them. And I found out that I went through a lot very quickly, and I never established a good relationship or a good partner that I trusted. And I think that's really key when we look at VARs is establishing that relationship or that partnership or that trust mechanism. And you have to work through it and find the right one for you.
So Zach, what were you looking for when you said that, you didn't get what you felt you deserved and you went to a different VAR and then a different VAR? What exactly were you looking for from them?
Yeah, I mean, from my aspect, when I was dealing with it is I needed somebody to come out, like I said, be my R&D. Mm-hmm. I wanted them to understand my network and come to me with suggestions of what was coming and what was future proofing. And working with those larger VARs, obviously my line of business, I was spending maybe $100,000 to $200,000 a year in IT. So it wasn't enough for them to dedicate that individual to me. Okay. And I just didn't feel like I was getting the attention.
Mm-hmm.
And so you said you found a balance there in kind of like a mid-size. And so the reason why I point that out is because you kind of brought up some differentiators, right? You have VARs that are quote fillers versus ones that are, that provide that value added, service, whether that be services or R&D, as you put it, or, attention, whatever that means or what you need. But then you also mentioned the size of the VAR can matter. And so that seems like a thing as well. So I think that's interesting. Just pointing that out.
So the value add in the context of a VAR, a value added reseller, is that consultative element and the time investment. Is that what you guys are thinking?
Yeah, I think that initially, and I can only speak for my company, but initially professional services was looked at as an incentive or an add-on. We talk about, quote fillers. We're going to sell you equipment, and if you buy your equipment from us, then we'll give you, say, X amount of time with an expert or someone who has a senior skill set in networking, for instance. And but what's happening now is that we're seeing more of a shift, especially with the larger VARs, is now the services are kind of catching up to hardware sales. And, I think that you're going to see that balance shift to where services, outsell hardware because, as we know, with the shifts in the industry and, moving to more of an SDN environment where there's a lot more programming skills and those types of things that are going to be required. You're going to see that what used to just be an add-on is now the primary product.
And
Yeah. So good.
Go ahead. Well, I was just going to say I've both been a small VAR and then I've worked in enterprises where we've used VARs, and I think that there's a huge difference in how in the quality of the VAR experience you get depending on how you look at that. And I think some customers behave in ways that maybe sabotage that relationship, or they don't do everything they can to get the most value out of their value-added reseller. So what are some things customers can do to really make the most of their VAR in that relationship? So, they're expensive. What can they do to make the most of that investment?
Oh, I thought you were going to start off with what have customers done to sabotage the relationship. That would have been a lot of fun to flesh that out. 'Cause I got a list I can go with here.
I think the thing I see most is just either a misunderstanding about what a VAR can do, or suspicion. And so I think a lot of times we look at sales and say, well, the sales guy you can't trust a sales guy, right? Well, that's sometimes true. It's not always true. But one of the things you have to do, right, is you have to understand the motivations. We're going to keep coming back to that theme, at least in the things that I talk about, is understanding the motivations of the people who are involved. Mm-hmm. But the other side of it is you need to understand, why you would need them in the first place. And I think a lot of customers don't necessarily fully grasp that. And I think Zach kind of hit on that early on, because you might be a big organization where you don't need a lot of engineering support. And so the right type of VAR for you might be the quote filler, right? If you've got fantastic engineers on staff and you're just looking for someone to sell you gear and you can't buy it directly, fantastic. Mm-hmm. That's the right type of place. Sure. A lot of places only need a hand, right? They've got engineers on staff, but they just kind of need someone to point them in the right direction, right? They don't need someone to do all the work, but someone to point them in the right direction. And I think what happens is when you get a misalignment between what the customer needs and what that particular VAR provides, you have this experience where it's like, I'm not getting what I expected, and therefore, the VAR is kind of not delivering whatever, and ends up being bad overall delivery. So I think there's some investment on the customer side that has to happen to make sure that you know what you're getting into, and you're finding the right type of partner to work with you based off of what your environment's like. And in a perfect world, that should all be spelled out in the SOW, right? And I say in a perfect world, yes, because not necessarily. A SOW is a very service delivery thing, and so yes, right. The clearer the SOW is, and again, spelling that out before service engagement helps make sure that expectations are met. But there's more to that than the VAR. Mm-hmm. There's the whole experience before an engineer ends up on site. So, pre-sales engagement that comes out and has a conversation with you about where the technology is going, the account managers, how they operate, how that VAR is going to treat you as a customer. Are you nothing to them because they're used to dealing with multi-billion-dollar corporations, or mm-hmm. are you in the right fold, right? Like in the right size of company that this VAR deals with them regularly, knows how to work with you. There's so much more than just specifically the service delivery. But that's a component of it for sure.
Yeah. And I think you hit the key word is expectations, and time again, those expectations again need to drive that relationship. If you're looking to create a good relationship with a VAR and have a partner you can trust and work with and build a solution set together, you need to have those expectations. A lot of times in my current role as a managing architect, I'm full pre-sales. So what I have to deal with is the expectation of the customer, and a lot of times the expectation of the account manager, the sales arm of the organization, saying we need to rip out this bill of materials or this statement of work in 2 days. And that doesn't give me a lot of time to ask questions back and forth, build a rapport, build a relationship with that customer. So if you're looking for something very aggressive, expect that in return. You're not going to get something that's invested. You're going to get that cookie cutter statement of work or that cookie cutter bomb in return. If you have a good trusted relationship with that person, they come back and ask you questions, and it takes them a week or 2 weeks. That's them taking their time and due diligence to really try to represent you as much as possible. Mm-hmm.
So we talked about suspicion. I just want to bring this back up, right? Generally, I found that I've worked for VAR for 3 years. 3 years today, actually. exactly on the dot. Yeah, look at that. That's yeah. And before that, I spent over a decade in enterprise. So like, looking at my experience from the enterprise side, I find it funny that like some of the places that I worked were very bad about expressing those expectations, right? Like there's a component of communication, just like any other. And the other theme I mentioned, one theme is earlier, but this theme is completely about communicating what you need. Or so the idea is this idea that we're going to build this relationship, and this relationship is just like any other relationship. If I don't tell you what I need and I'm not clear about it, or the VAR approaches it in some way that doesn't communicate clearly what they're planning on doing or what their motivations are, you're going to end up with a lot of missed connections there, and that's a tough way to build a relationship. So the idea is like Zach said, even a customer that comes in and demands something quickly. I say demand, that sounds like a bad word. That's not what I meant. If someone expects something to be delivered quickly, that's okay. They just have to know what the consequence of that is. And then it would be our job to explain to them, if we haven't built that relationship, we can do that for you, but the expectation is this.
And the communication, it all comes down to communication. And we talk about the pre-sales that was mentioned earlier. If the pre-sales, if the account team, when they come in and they make the initial presentation or go in and gather requirements, if they don't match up skill sets or match up hardware or all the components, if they're not matched up correctly with the requirements, then that's a problem right there. And then again, as Jordan mentioned, if we're not matching up with expectations, then it's the same thing. And that sets the tone. And so what happens then is if you get an implementation engineer that comes in and he thinks he's bringing one group of things into the organization, and he gets there and what they want is completely different, then immediately right off the bat, trust is already taking a hit. And that guy is operating at a deficit. And
does anyone else feel like we're like talking about like a relationship helpline here? So it's funny. It's funny, but I think it's absolutely true, because we're sitting here, we're talking about expectations and communication. And I mean, you could translate this from the VAR, enterprise relationship to someone who's dating. But I think the same things are true, right? In that, all of this comes down to the fact that everyone's happy so long as everyone gets what they're looking for, right? And no one's going to be able to deliver that unless it's communicated, right? None of us are mind readers. And so there are really great engagements that happen with VARs if that line of communication is open. And maybe that should be the primary focus, right? When you start engaging with a new VAR, is to figure out, is this someone that I can talk to? Is this someone
and not only that
I can relate with?
Exactly, but it's just like relationships. It's still old fashioned. They expect the VAR to buy lunch. They expect the VAR to get the tab, the VAR. So some things never change, right?
Some things never change.
And I think there's a third party that we didn't even mention yet, and that's the manufacturer. So when we talk about VARs, we have this relationship between a customer and a VAR, but then we also have this person back here, this manufacturer that the VAR is representing on behalf of, but they also have their own kind of agenda to this relationship as well. So I think it's important when we talk to, Phil mentioned the sabotaging of this, and it sounds very negative, but the idea is if you're having conversations with the VAR and then you turn around and have those same exact conversations with the manufacturer and you want to compare results, that's a lot of times where negativity gets brought out in that relationship. In my experience, it works a lot better if you bring the manufacturer and the VAR to the same table and have that conversation in an open forum, because then they can both go back and forth about that instead of comparing solutions together. I don't know what you guys' experience are with that, but I feel that it's a very interesting way of going about it.
Always try to do that. I always try to, whether I was in a pre-sales or post-sales role or in one of those hybrid roles, always tried to bring some folks from our end, from the VAR side, obviously the AM and the project manager, which we haven't talked about, and I want to get to that. And then, if there was a pre-sales person, whatever, but definitely bring like the Cisco rep, or the VMware rep, somebody, or the EMC rep at the time. So that way we're really supporting each other and correcting each other along the way. And it wraps the customer in that blanket of comfort, like, okay, these guys know what they're doing. We're in good hands. And that's something that I really think that, I'm in an enterprise now for the past couple of years, and we don't really use VARs. But I do remember being on the VAR side, we always had this idea of we're selling our ecosystem, we're selling our system, we're selling our everything that we are as a company is at their disposal. It's not just billable hours of this engineer and his ability to crank out code or config,
No, you're absolutely right. And for instance, that's something that we always is sold is hey, we've got a team of engineers not only that can answer questions, but if you need something tested, we have a place we can do that. You need something labbed up, you need something, you need us to come up with the validation of your design. We can do, and lab as a service is a big thing that VARs are latching onto now.
Okay.
So, I know that, my current engagement right now, that is something that they use, and it's used a lot. It's very valuable. So.
Well, and I think so. Phil brought up things customers can do to sabotage their relationship with their VAR, and
I think Yvonne really
no, Yvonne, that was you.
You brought it up while we were recording, so see, it's on.
Oh, is that okay? All right, fair enough.
For the listener, you brought it up, but that's okay. No, I did. I actually put that line item in the show notes, so I take full responsibility for that. So I have seen customers do things like they'll go to their VAR and say, we want to hire you for an engagement for this amount of time. And when we're done, I want you to give me security, for example. That's like completely the wrong question. I think customers sometimes want to delegate responsibility to VARs that the VAR can't possibly do, because they don't understand the organization. They don't understand the mission of the organization. They don't understand the vision. And you can't have somebody come in on a short-term, 6-month, year, even 18-month engagement and like deliver you a security practice. That's, or make sure you're going to be secure for a certain period of time. And I'm picking on security because that one's easy. But they do it in all kinds of different verticals in the IT stack. I think that's one thing that customers do that really put their VAR in a position where they just can't win.
Go ahead, Zach.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and that's the compounding on that is the idea of doing like a bid process for VARs. Every time there's a project, I'm just going to bid it out, and whoever comes back with the best response. Well, when a VAR responds to that bid, they're only responding to what you put in that RFP, and that RFP is a finite document. And we know that we know all IT departments are organic and growing at their own pace, and with their all fun little fungus growing in there somewhere, and you're not going to find that in an RFP.
Not in my lawn.
Yeah. So
you mean VAR? You mean the RFP doesn't spell out where all the skeletons are buried?
Exactly. Maybe that's a better way than fungus. I don't know. But the idea is, when we go through this whole RFP process and a VAR has to respond to that, it's very tricky. And then you step into it and you want to do this engagement, as Yvonne was saying, and you're stuck to this statement of work because we're going just for this. And then all of a sudden you start getting scope creep. And we all love the word scope creep because it happens in every project that we do because we can't find every skeleton that's there. So, the bid process, I think, really kills VARs more than helps your relationship. Or, I understand from the cost perspective of getting the lowest cost, but is it really the money that you're driving for? Or do you want somebody that's going to come in and actually get done what you want done?
And I think that's why relationship is so important, because in order for a VAR or any IT services company to come in and help an enterprise IT company or of any size, they have to know a little bit about the environment. They got to have some knowledge, because otherwise they're not going to be able to frame a solution that's going to fit that organization. You're right. And then one of the reasons the federal government is a perfect example, because you mentioned RFPs. Almost everything they do goes out to RFP, especially if it's any type of a major IT infrastructure replacement or upgrade or anything like that. And, most of those companies may or may not, a lot of them may or may not have any idea what the network itself looks like.
That's true.
They're bidding on a generic set of parameters that are thrown in that RFP. And so they're playing catch up from day one. And from day one, we talk about scope creep. Scope creep is built into the RFP. So,
yeah.
Also to this, so there's a couple of points here. So the first one is there's some homework that a company has to do. Like you cannot just buy something by throwing money at it. Like regardless of what the project is, I can't throw money at it and get a core switch upgrade. I can't throw money at it and get security. I can't throw money at it and get insert product X here. the reality is that unless it's a completely greenfield environment, there's going to be some level of integration that has to happen, which is knowledge that your employees have. And so this expectation that I can just pay, and this might be more leadership than engineering, but the idea that I can just, sign this statement of work and that's it, and we can just set this guy off in the corner and let him go, and he's going to be able to make this happen. He might be able to, but probably not the way you want it to, right? The more that you can provide as context for that engagement, the better it's going to be. The other thing that's interesting dynamic as well, I don't know how widely it's used, but this idea of, fixed fee project versus a time and materials project. And this comes back to my point about motivations. A lot of companies like this idea of fixed fee because it seems like it limits the scope of what that bill is going to be at the end. And I understand that motivation. Like I understand not wanting to be surprised by a bill that's larger than what you were doing. And it kind of puts the responsibility on the VAR to make that happen. But the problem in a fixed fee engagement is the entire motivation. Now let's just take the goodness of every engineer out of it, right? And just say what the raw motivation is. And the raw motivation is to be out of that project as quickly as possible. Because if I quoted you 40 hours and I can get it done in 20, well, guess what? We just made a lot of money.
You're getting a bonus.
Right. And so you have to understand that motivation. Not that every engineer is that way, but that is a risk that you're taking when you ask for a fixed fee project, that you're going to get as little work as possible to meet the scope, and anything else is going to cost you extra. Now, when you do time and materials of the project, there's still a risk on that one. The other problem is that someone milks it, right? This is really 4 hours of work, but the engineer takes 8 and bills for it. That's a risk too, but I think it's easier to monitor. Like if your engineer's on site or you're working with them, like I can say, that wasn't 8 hours worth of work and we can have a conversation about that. But I just see this idea, this fixed fee project, like it somehow averts risk, and it doesn't. I think the risk then becomes hidden. So I just kind of wanted to bring that up since it was kind of in context.
So I want to move us along a little bit because we could hang out here forever. But let's talk about really we could. So sometimes FTE engineers on staff, or technical people may feel threatened by VAR. And I think we've seen that. What are some things that both sides can do to improve that? And think about what can a FTE engineer do to use the value that a VAR engineer brings? Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
One answer here. Tell me what it is that you want to do. Because if I walk in and you tell it to me, it shouldn't be this way, but if I go tell your management that that's what you should do, they're going to listen to me. They may not be listening to you, but I've seen it happen 100 times. Like we've made this recommendation. We think this is the way to go. Unless I think it's a bad idea, of course, I'm not going to recommend it then. But if you want to do this thing and it sounds like it's a good way to go, I can lend weight to that. They paid money for me to be here to be a consultant to your organization. Tell me what it is that you're looking to get done. I might be able to help you get it done. I see my relationship as being a partner. And that's kind of how every VAR tries to position themselves as a partner to a company. But I really believe that's true. Like I keep coming back to the same customers. I don't want to ruin that relationship. I want to make sure that when I leave there that I feel like I've been providing. If you close me and shut me off in a corner, I'm not going to be able to help you very much. I'm only going to be able to do what's in the scope. But if you have a conversation with me and tell me what it is that you're trying to accomplish, even outside of this project, I might be able to lend a hand in getting those things done, even if they're not in the scope. That I can have a conversation or bring it up like, hey, I see this. Maybe you might want to do this. And it's amazing how often that a consultant's word will be taken after one recommendation where a local engineer just gets ignored. And I know that bothers local engineers. It bothered me when I was a on-staff engineer like crazy, but it's the truth. It happens.
Yeah, I think Jordan, you hit it hugely, is the idea that you need to trust that person and tell them what you want because they can get it pushed through because they are bringing out an outside person to look at it with their eyes, and they're going to trust them a little bit more than the inside person. But I think the second thing is I was that person 7 years ago that hated working with VARs because I was the arrogant, cocky guy that wanted to do everything himself. And I thought it was my job to do this. They hired me to do this.
I'm kidding.
Oh, wow.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wow.
But the idea behind it is that they're coming in, use their knowledge, use their skill set. They've been a lot of places you haven't. I remember those nights I was there at 2 a.m. because I was trying to fix this bug I had no idea was there. And as soon as I called my VAR the next day, they were like, oh yeah, we upgraded to, 6.0 of Nexus. And yeah, there was that bug and you had to reboot your supervisors every 2 minutes or something. And I sat there all night trying to figure it out when that VAR saw it 3 other times at different places and they could have stopped me from doing that. That's the experience that I think a VAR can bring to the table because they've seen it other places. It's so hard for you to mock up certain things in your own environment. The VAR can come in with that level-headed experience and be like, don't do that. Don't go to this version. And I see Warren shaking his head because he's been in that same boat. I don't know how many times.
Yeah, just a couple, but the biggest thing, when you talk about an engineer, and this is my first VAR I've ever worked at. I was like y'all. I was a staff network engineer for most of my career, so it was definitely a switch. And the biggest recommendation I can make, from the VAR engineer's perspective, is when you come in, be humility. You come in, you're there to help. You're there to come alongside them, and they brought you in to be part of the team. And they may not realize it when you first get there, but if they want you to come in and do something that you may think is, well, that's not exactly what I got hired or brought in here to do, but you do that with a smile on your face and say, hey, whatever, I'm here to help. And if you have that sort of attitude, it kind of takes the armor down and so to speak, there's not an immediate suspicion that you're coming in there and trying to push them out of their chair. And I think that's the key to building relationships is coming in and just saying, hey, I'm here to make you successful. If you're successful, that means that I'm successful. And if they start believing that, then they trust you, and then they start letting you do more things. And it's a tough lesson to learn when you first start doing this, because it's exactly what you feel like. You come in. Well, I was told I was here to do this project, or I was told I was here to do this, and sometimes I get jerked in 25 different directions per day. And on this engagement, it's been like that almost every one I've been on. And sometimes I'm asked to do things that are just completely outside of what I was asked to, or my expectation was I was going to be able to do. So.
Yeah, you brought it back to relationships again, right? This is an interpersonal relationship among people, which are by virtue of our craziness as human beings, always difficult. Jordan mentioned dating before, and I don't know what anybody else mentioned, but it's true. And just like in our professional relationships and personal relationships, there are appropriate boundaries that we have to have. And I have a couple of different stories here that I can recount very quickly. I tease project managers or the whole world of the PMO a lot, right? But I do very much value a project manager that I can redirect a customer to. So when I was with VARs, in one instance, you go in and you keep your head down and do a decent job, and you mind your own business, because you're sort of coworkers for 3 months, but you're sort of not. So I've learned, like Warren said, you stay humble and you keep your head down. You do your thing. You don't necessarily interact with every office joke that's going on, and maybe you're in the spare cube. I don't bring pictures of my kids in, right? I don't. Maybe you do that, but. A little bit of scope creep is one thing, because that's a way to build that relationship. So, you need help, something completely unrelated to the project. I'm putting in some Nexus 7Ks, 5Ks, 2Ks and building something like that out. And over there, they're having an issue with Active Directory. I'm like, I can fix that in about a minute. You help them, it's 15 minutes. What did it cost you? Nothing, and it builds that relationship. And then you get the relationship that Jordan has, where they call you back. But something so that was an example of one where there was the customer who kept getting in touch with the account manager and project manager because their expectations weren't met. And so when I sort of changed my perspective to be more like that, where I'm going to just let those little things go and do whatever I can to go above and beyond within reason, that sort of changed the relationship. And they did ask for me to come back. And what I took from that in future projects, different projects now, was right off the bat, at the end of work days where I hit deliverables, I would email everybody, the team, the PM, the whoever lead at the customer site, and then the engineer or engineers that I was working with directly. And I would highlight, these are the deliverables that we hit today. And this is what so-and-so, Mr. Customer, did. Really was grateful for that, because that got us through. So this is where we're at in the project. And that sort of communication, it kind of stroked their ego a little bit, but none of it was false. And I got so much positive feedback from that. And that's how from that point forward, that's sort of how I handled it with my customers. And for what it's worth, one of those people called me later on and offered me a job. So But yeah, for what it's worth, I think that Warren's right here. It's interpersonal relationships, and that's what it's all about. This could be a podcast about, law offices or medical practices or whatever. Maybe we're not network engineers, and we could be having a very similar conversation, except instead of packets, we're talking about
kidneys.
Yeah. Kidneys or
where'd that come
contracts, whatever. Blood cells. So.
All right. So we've talked a lot about customers. We haven't talked so much about what it's really like to be a VAR. And I would love to hear some of our VAR folks talk about what are some of the big challenges when you're the VAR, when you're the value added expert that they hire to come in and solve all their problems.
I'll start this off because Jordan and I are on the phone or on the call here together, and Jordan and I have the pleasure of working together, and we work in the two very distinct fields of pre-sales and post-sales in our organization. So I think one of the biggest struggles that we deal with is that customers expect the pre-sales to come in and architect this whole solution that took us 6 months to do, and then we hand it off to a post-sales engineer to deliver. And our internal kickoff call may only be an hour long because Jordan's crazy busy and he's running around. So there's a big challenge between the pre-sales and the post-sales as we look at VARs, and how do we do that better to help the customer out. But there's again that expectation and that relationship where if Jordan doesn't know your environment, I have to relay everything that I've gathered in the last 6 months to him. It's going to take a long time for that process to happen. So be patient. Don't ask, can we kick this project off next week? And that guy's going to come in there with like nothing in his hands. So Jordan, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, there's definitely that component. Pre-sales, post-sales is interesting, right? And I know different places handle it differently. I know that depending on the size of the VAR, and maybe it's not even the size of the VAR, I think everyone's looking to find that nice balance there. Some completely separate it so that you can have specialists, right? The pre-sales person is focused specifically on the pre-sales side of the equation. Post-sales is all about delivery. There's others where like an engineer will get assigned to a customer and do both. Pre and post sales. And I think both have pros and cons, right? Like neither one is right, which is probably the reason why it's split between different VARs and how people do it, right? I don't think that there's a perfect answer, but this again comes back to understanding motivations. So when the customer's having conversations with pre-sales, understand who you're talking to, how it's being delivered, and set your expectations about what that handoff should look like, what the engineer should know coming in. And then we, as a VAR, can tell you, okay, that's great. We can do that, but that's going to require X, Y, Z, right? Because ultimately we want to make the customer happy. Whatever it is that you want us to deliver, we're going to work on delivering it the way you want it to deliver, but we need to know what that is. And then we need to tell you, what that's going to entail. And I think that gets missed a lot of times. And so that we end up with exactly what Zach said. And that is that, I have an hour's generous, sometimes a half hour on a call where I look at a statement of work and I say, okay, that looks good. I get to ask about 4 questions. And next thing you know, I'm showing up at a customer site and we're replacing, Catalyst cores with Nexus cores, which can be a rather convoluted, exchange depending on what features are in use and all kinds of things like that. So it's one of those, if the expectation is to have a really smooth handoff, that should be part of the conversation.
And I can speak, as working at a large VAR, Jordan, I know that, some of the smaller, and I think that would be really a smooth way to go. If you had a guy that did the pre-sales and did the post-sales and all that, like it's just, because he knows exactly what the design is from the get-go. And the toughest challenge is when you walk into a project kickoff meeting and somebody hands you a drawing that has no information on it, and that is the high level design.
Yep.
and you're left to answer. You're writing down 20 questions as quick as you possibly can, and you're going to ask those questions. And I actually like this. I don't know that everybody could do it. I tell a lot of people who ask me about my job, I say, well, you have to have ADHD, I think, to really enjoy doing what we do, because you're literally going from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next. And, you move from one engagement where to your point, you're upgrading, Catalyst switches to Nexus, to the next one where you're doing, you're installing firewalls and doing a VPN mesh. And, the next one you're doing you're going into a WAN design with ASR 1Ks where they're moving from EIGRP to BGP.
Right.
It's never ending. So
right, that's just a pro and a con to me, right? Like it's a pro because you get to experience a lot of stuff, but it's also a con because you don't get to settle in. One of my biggest cons in being a VAR engineer is the fact that I don't own anything. Like I came out of over a decade of owning a network. I mean, it was different ones at different companies, but It was like, I give this thing care and feeding, and I can tell the difference from when I started and
it's your baby.
When I ended. It's my baby. It's what I'm working on. There is evidence for my effort. And, as a VAR engineer, that doesn't always necessarily happen. I don't always get to see the successful completion. I'm not the one who gets to turn off the switch when it's all done. Right? Like I get the customer 80, 90% there, because that's the difficult part. And then they do the manual migration, and I walk out, and there was no, triumphant, successful party. We didn't go out and have drinks afterwards. You know what I'm saying? Like there's just none of that you get in the enterprise world, where you get the satisfaction of completion.
I think you're bringing up
You don't go beat your catalyst switches in the parking lot with a baseball bat once you pull them out?
Yeah, that would be very therapeutic.
Office space. That's right. So I mean, you get that, but the flip side of it is, and this is, having worked in, in some really political environments when I was in the government, I can tell you that the best part is you stay long enough. If you ever heard that what is this? A fish and guests both go bad after 3 or 4 days or something like that. So you stay at a place long enough to make relationships and everything like that. And if you're fortunate enough, you get to see some things get done. But then, when you start getting tired of the politics, you go somewhere else and experience someone else's politics. So,
the politics is an interesting component, right? We brought up earlier this idea that, if tell me what you want to accomplish and I can help you do that. And the reason I think that happens is because I'm getting paid probably 4 or 5 times an hour what that engineer is who's on site, right? Because they're paying a lot for that service for me to be there. And if you want to play politics, we can play politics over this decision for the next 4 days, and you can pay me for that time if you want. It's up to you. Or we can make this decision and move forward, right? And I think that people get more inclined with that. So there's a whole lot less politics when all of a sudden the politics cost money.
Right. That's right.
Right? The politics really cost money. So yeah, it's one of the biggest perks of being a VAR engineer is I don't deal with corporate politics.
I got to say that I hear that, and I've experienced that I agree with you. But one of the struggles I had when I was with VARs, except for the first VAR that I ever worked with, which was different, that was very regional, I really lacked my interpersonal coworker component. I did make sure that I kept some semblance of distance between me and the customers that I was dealing with. We were friendly, of course, and yes, we took them out to lunch because that's what you do. But there was a line. You had to be careful, and I really missed that because I didn't interact with my coworkers that I built like my family. Not my home family, but like your work family, and I struggled with that for a long time, actually. And I think now, both because of my age, my life situation, my work situation and experience, I could probably deal with that a lot better. I think because I just don't care as much, but I don't mean that to be negative.
I've become more apathetic over the years.
Life is, you gotta move forward. I'm paying my mortgage. My kids are happy. And so I look at things a little bit differently. But that was something that I struggled with. So I do get that, you don't have to deal with that. You're only there for a month or 6 weeks and you move on after the ASAs are in and humming. But then I'm never connecting with folks, and I'm, living out of my car for the most part, eating McDonald's all the time. Well, Burger King, but you know what I mean. So.
But there's a lot of truth to that. It's one of my biggest complaints about being a VAR engineer is the fact that I came out of teams. I came out of places where it was me and one other person, me and 3 other people, me and 4 other people, whatever that worked in this network or this area of the network.
Yeah, but
go ahead.
Could you get that though if you had a good relationship, like a strategic partnership with a company? I mean, I know some of the things that you and I deal with, Jordan. We have a couple customers that I feel like they're coworkers of mine because I've seen them so frequently.
Yeah. So and that's a bit unique where we're at. But yeah, I have better relationship with some of my customers than I do with my peers. Right. My peers on my team. I
talk to Yvonne more than I talk to the peers on my team.
Right. Because think about just the sheer nature of what we do, right? You're not sending 3 of me in from core, right? I'm the route switch expert when you come in from my company. So I'm not going with the other route switch expert, who's the person I have most in common with. Right. And so my other peers I see once, twice a year in meetings, I talk to them on the phone sometimes. So that collective relationship. And as much as Zach is right that some of my customers, there was a couple of customers that have repeated engagements and I spend a lot of time with, and I, absolutely value the relationship that's there. There still is a level of guarded, right? They're a customer. I'm doing this.
There is a line.
It's still a professional relationship. Not that a coworker relationship isn't professional. It still is professional, but I think the line is somewhat different. You're paying for me to be here. It makes things a little bit different.
There has to be some type of boundary, but like I said, I've been on this engagement I'm on, and I've made relationships that I'll probably have the rest of my life. I mean, but I haven't normally been on engagements this long. I think the longest one I did before this one was 7 or 8 months. It wasn't the same. So, yep.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and I think
so. Well, I was going to say there have been a couple things in the show notes that we've tiptoed around because nobody wants to call out their customers, and I value that from you guys. But just about specific things that customers do to make VAR's lives difficult, and I think I'm just going to list them here because I think it's important for customers to hear that. It's really important for customers to be prepared when they're working with their VAR. I know that the folks I know that are VARs, that they show up to do an engagement and the customer's completely unprepared. It's really frustrating. I mean, you're paying them to be there, but you're wasting their time and you're wasting your company's money. So that's kind of a big deal.
I have a quick anecdote because this one's I'll say relatively fresh. I had a customer who the primary engineer was out sick, right? And that happens, right? Things happen. Things are outside of your control. I was working remotely, so I worked 3/4 of the day building a solution, but we needed to test it. And I'm trying to get a hold of this guy, and he's just not responding, right? And so, this is, to me, as part of that prep and planning is we had set this date. I'm sitting here working away at things, and now it's time to go, make sure that it does what it needs to do, and I can't get a hold of this guy. Well, the problem in this is that if I had known he was sick, I could have rearranged my schedule, right, and made sure that he was available so we could complete this work this day. What ended up happening is I found out the next week that he was out sick, and now I'm booked for the next couple months. Like all the days on my calendar are full, and now I've got to fit him into the cracks somewhere, right? And if that communication had happened there, if we had prepared, if we had talked ahead of time, we wouldn't have ended up in this situation. And now all of a sudden it's there, and it's just a funny anecdote, or I don't know if funny is the right word, but it's just an anecdote that shows just tell us what's going on, right? And then be prepared for when we're going to do the work, because if you're not, you're going to end up with the worst product. Not because we don't want to deliver it, but because we just can't. There's no way for me to test remotely for this wireless system. That was part of the deal, right? I can't join your wireless network from my house to make sure that it's working. That's part of what you need to do. And so if you can't do that, I need to know that. Right.
You're talking communication.
Yeah, it's back to communication, but it's also
very important. Yeah.
The idea. I mean, I've showed up to customer sites and they didn't know I was showing up. I mean, right. it's on the calendar, but they somehow didn't know I was going to be there. Yeah. I have emails in here where it was emailed and they said, "Yeah, absolutely, we're ready for you." And then I walk in, they're like, "Oh, I forgot you were going to be here today." Okay, how am I supposed to help you if that's where we're starting?
And again, when we talk about communications, back to the people, whoever made the decision in the organization to bring the VAR in, has to communicate the goals and objectives to the people who you're actually going to be working with. Because I think that sometimes there's a disconnect. And I know we talked about smaller companies. Yvonne touched on this. I think it was when we were talking before the show started. But you got a smaller company where the hierarchy is really small. The communication layers are really not that far, the ladder's not that high, right? And, but it's a large corporation. If that decision was made up at a director level or VP level, that the reasons why that contractor's there, they may not know, or they may not even understand what the scope of it is.
And that contributes to engineers feeling threatened and not understanding what's going on and misdirection of your VAR. So, that's an excellent point. So, I have, and actually talking about some of the negatives, you guys brought up some positives, but before we go, I would really like for those of you who are VARs or who have been VARs to talk about what are the great things about being a VAR. Like you get a killer job offer from a VAR. What would you tell somebody are the best things about doing VAR work?
You get to touch all the new toys. You generally can advance your career quickly because you're always working and getting pulled in 1,000 different directions, which is stressful, but you learn in dog years. So, if you're new in your career, and you have the energy and the wherewithal, you work 5 years in a VAR, you learn a good VAR if you're not doing the same project over and over, you'll learn a lot, and it can be a wonderful learning experience and, pretty lucrative. They don't tend to pay peanuts. That's
totally true. And I think that's, for me, and I can only speak from my experience, but that's the best part is I have technology ADHD. I don't want to focus on the same thing, from one engagement to the next. And I like the challenge more than anything else. I like the challenge of going in an organization. We talk about relationships, building the relationships, being able to execute, and then become a trusted advisor to that customer. If you can do all those things, then you've really mastered. I mean, those are the things that you have to master to be, really good at what we do.
Yep. Yeah. The relationship side is important to me. And so when I say that in building and establishing that trust and then being able to execute for them, I think, Warren kind of just put the point right there is that, I like the challenge of being able to, fix a problem that is difficult to fix or work out a solution, interoperability that maybe not the easiest or most straightforward thing to do. And so being that trusted advisor and being able to come in and help, customers do things they wouldn't be able to do on their own. There's a huge sense of accomplishment in that.
Mm-hmm. And I'm just a huge social nerd. So, I mean, I love talking to people, but I love talking technology. So, the idea of working for a VAR and be able to daily go to multiple customers, multiple different environments and see what people are doing. I mean, it amazes me the situations I've been in, and I'm like, wow, you got that to work? Or, oh, wow, that's a really good way of doing it.
How are you not on fire right now?
Exactly. But I mean, every day it is something new, and it is not that repetitive job. And as you can tell, I'm a younger individual, so I don't want to be stuck in a routine. I want to see different things. I want to be exposed to different things, and also network. I mean, look at this. I mean, I'm on the Network Collective right now. This is pretty big for me. I mean, being a 12-year-old on the Network
big
Collective.
Time. You're big time, buddy.
Honestly, Zach, this is pretty big for any 14-year-old. So
thank you. Child labor laws I had to sign a release form to get on. No, I'm kidding. But no, I mean,
Phil will give you his autograph.
Yeah, exactly. But the idea of working for a VAR, it's a very exciting area. I mean, there are negatives, but there's negatives to every job. There are, and it depends on exactly where you are in your life and what you want to do. Mm-hmm. I don't have kids. I have a lot of free time, and this gives me the ability to be very flexible and go around and do what I want to do.
You had a lot of free time.
Yes, I had a lot of free time until I got this job.
It's not going to happen anymore. And that chair is awesome, by the way. I have to plug that on the show too.
That DX Racer,
fantastic.
Plug it up.
Oh, yeah.
I thought we needed to do an intro just for the chair.
Yeah, we considered it.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right, guys. Thanks a lot. Hopefully we've shed some light for our watchers and listeners on what it's like to work with a VAR and to be a VAR. Before we close out, I will give Phil an opportunity to just let you know where you can find him online.
Hey, I'm Phil Gervasi. You can find me on Twitter at network_Phil and my blog at networkphil.com.
And Jordan?
You can find me on Twitter at bcjordo. On my blog that I write on probably once a year is jordanmartin.net.
All right. And I'm Yvonne Sharp. You can find me on the blog at esharp.net and on Twitter at Sharp Network. Thanks for joining us for Network Collective.